Their clashing auras could be felt for miles. Gusts of force billowed out from their confrontation, swaying and compressing the nearby grass before eventually uprooting it entirely. The field they stood upon was now nothing more than a barren patch of dirt, scarred by their presence.
You are an interesting specimen, I must say.
And you aren't bleeding yet, and that's a problem.
I pity your foolishness.
Jerry's hand raised in front of his Eigengrau visor. As he concentrated his willpower into his palm, a small, searing light began to flicker into vision. Slowly it burned, ruminating with smoldering energy, before cascading out into a brilliant, blistering ball of flame.
I don't bleed.
The searing bolt of blazing energy shot from his hand, penetrating the darkened sky with an intense display of white and orange. Like a streak of light, it shot towards Killblog. He could barely veer out of the way before the beam struck the earth beneath him, charring the soil in ebony black.
Is that the best you can do? This will be easier than I thought.
You have yet to see what horrors lie in wait for you.
With a snap of his fingers, a small, cylindrical device appeared in his grasp. A button press was all it took for the device to softly hum before shooting forth a bright red light. It stopped short about a meter away from the hilt, glowing with plasmic energy. The beam made a warping and wobbling sound as Jerry waved it in front of him, egging Killblog to strike.
Oh, look at that! What a coincidence!
In an almost identical manner, Killblog's arm extended to his side, causing a near replica of Jerry's device to spawn in his grasp. It flickered to life, emanating that same mechanical red energy.
I haven't had to use this in months. Can't wait to give her a spin on your flesh.
In an instant, Killblog rushed at his foe, his weapon wavering through the air like a hologram. He swung his heated blade over his head, attempting to bring it down on Jerry. He was met with a riposte, clashing red hues with his foreign opponent. The two crystalline constructs wavered against each other until both were pushed back by the repulsion. Killblog tightened his grip on the saber while Jerry took an elegant stance.
Make your move.
Clash after clash, blow after blow, the lightsabers struck one another in a brilliant display of crimson light. The moonlit night they found themselves in was illuminated by the confrontation, scarring the nearby trees and foliage a radiating scarlet.
Gotta say, later, Ted, you're lasting longer than the others. How'd you get so jacked?
I do my homework.
Killblog's maw broke into a grin.
Well, I'm sure you didn't study for this one.
At once, his flesh began to slowly ruminate in an indescribable, almost agonistic manner. His skin bubbled, growing ever more caustic as he eyed his foe with utmost vehemence.
After all, the game's no fun when you already know the joke.
His chest burst open, and out sprung an impish creature similar in composition to his creator. It was short, slightly over 3 feet tall, and its flesh was bleached white but stained red, much like Killblog himself. Through the stretched skin and nauseating amounts of blood, Jerry could barely make out the being which this homunculus was intended to resemble.
So you've absorbed the monkey. I shall put him down like the animal he is.
Careful with this one. He gave me a tune of annoyance before he croaked.
Nice one. Too bad that'll be your last.
The golem charged forwards, claws and teeth bared like a rabid animal. Swipe after swipe grazed by Jerry's, he swiftly veered out of the way of every attack. Jerry's curiosity eventually turned to boredom as the creature's attacks became predictable.
Is this supposed to be entertaining?
Before Jerry could finish his thought, he felt a clamp down on his leg. He quickly shook off the creature that was biting down into his calf, its teeth now covered in a blackish substance. It skid across the ground before getting back up. Jerry grimaced as he surveyed the damage caused, noticing a substantial piece of torn fabric in the homunculus's mouth. It had ruined his suit. Jerry took a deep breath as the creature snarled back at him.
So you've chosen death.
Jerry's body fades into a mist-like visage, spreading and surrounding the creature. Confused, it attempts to follow up with another swipe, but the only thing it hit was thin air. In a rage, it looked around, frenzied, failing to notice the boot heading towards its face. In an instant, it rocketed upward. After a few seconds, the two fighters looked upward to see a shockwave across the moon's surface.
Another dog to the slaughter. None of them ever learn.
Jerry's visor began to seemingly tear across the middle before he rapidly ascended upwards.
Hey, I'm not done with you yet!
Irritated at Jerry's departure, Killblog immediately follows, leaving a trail of blood as they both exit the planet's atmosphere. It was cold and dark, the only illuminating presence being the small specks of stars among the vast cosmos. The homunculus tries to recollect itself in the great silence. But then, the empty void of space was met with a roaring shockwave as Jerry violently shoves the golem's face into the moon's surface, splattering its blood across the cracked, rocky terrain. Jerry slowly brings the creature to his face.
Let us put you back where you belong.
Jerry's visor finally splits open to almost resemble that of an evil grin, as his voice distorts.
The pits of oblivion.
It became louder and louder, and the mouth grew more grotesque. There was no struggle from the creature, being devoured in one fell swoop. Jerry seemed to be rather pleased at the moment to be rid of the creature. The moment didn't last, though, as Killblog soon lands, shaking the moon as he assesses the peculiar situation.
Swallow them whole, huh? No wonder you got so big!
You want to talk, you massive pile of blood-soaked lard. But perhaps you do truly wish to test my patience.
Now you're catching on? Good for you!
Killblog smiled gleefully and sprang towards Jerry for a deadly blow. Jerry did not hesitate, however, matching Killblog as they collided together. They found themselves in an arm lock, matched in strength, each one desperately trying to force the other off balance. Jerry managed to throw Killblog over his shoulder, but Killblog sustained no noteworthy damage, instead grinning back at Jerry once more.
What are you hiding behind that mask? Or are you just some empty doll?
I have nothing to hide. In fact, let me show you even more of me.
As Jerry's visor returns back to its normal form, he retrieves an odd medallion with a green ribbon from his person. Suddenly, another Jerry is present, and then another. Eventually amassing into an army lined up behind their original. The clones' backs then begin to shift and rumble, until an extra set of arms emerge from each and every one of them. Killblog gave a devilish smirk, rather intrigued as to where this could possibly lead, deciding to let it play out. The clones huddled around Jerry as he pointed toward the sky with one hand. The clones in turn raised all their available hands to the sky with him. Dark energy began spewing out of their fingertips, concentrated into an area above their heads. The dark energy began to morph into an eclipsing ball of pure destruction that grew in size at a rapid rate.
Now sit down and die, you worthless excuse of a life form.
Jerry points firmly at Killblog and sends the enormous death ball hurtling towards him. Killblog stands there in awe of the unstable, destructive attack that encompasses his entire body. As soon as it made contact with the ground, lightning began to shoot out from the attack, magma erupting onto the surface. The ground began to crumble away. And eventually the moon in its entirety was washed away in the display of brilliant light. After it was set ablaze in the explosion, the only remnants of the former planetoid were scattered shards of its crust, drifting through space like dust in the wind. Jerry rested on a piece of the moon's crust, surveying the rubble for any sign of his foe. But just as it seemed all was settling down...
That was weak! I think I fought toddlers tougher than you! Let me show you how killing's really done!
He turned around and saw that among the pieces emerged Killblog, leaping between the debris, barreling towards him.
I assure you, I'm quite well versed in that territory. Let me give you a taste.
Jerry raised a hand in front of himself, causing all the pieces surrounding him to come to a halt. With merely a thought, Jerry telekinetically hurled large quantities of debris at Killblog. Killblog began dodging the incoming shards, nimbly avoiding each and every piece as he got closer to Jerry. He readied his twin knives, slicing through some of the rocks, and aiming the tips towards the oncoming rubble. He blasts each shard coming his way as he closes the gap even further.
I grow weary of this. Your time has come, Killblog.
Jerry stops playing with his food, attempting to drain Killblog of his excessive power. The drain makes contact and slowly begins leeching off Killblog's essence. However, he doesn't seem too bothered by this, as Killblog quickly shortens the gap while one of Jerry's hands is preoccupied draining him.
Not fast enough, fruitcake! Now let me show you true carnage!
Killblog frantically slashes Jerry all over, tearing his clothes, leaving scars all over and cracking his visor.
Enough of this!
This, however, only enraged Jerry further. He violently grabs Killblog by the throat and squeezes with all his might. And in a blind rage hurls him across the entire solar system. Killblog zips past many planets before he regains his composure and stops his momentum. Quickly, though, he began to see a tiny light illuminating from the other side of the solar system. Jerry's arm was searing with flame as he charged up a fire so fierce it could light up all the cosmos.
Taste the flames of Judgement!
He launches the giant torrent of flame towards Killblog in hopes of burning him to cinders.
What a nice light show!
Killblog raises his knives once more and charges his own attack in response. In one stroke, he unleashes a devastating purple beam in an attempt to counteract the fast-approaching flames. The two energies shake the heavens as they draw ever closer, and once they make contact, space itself had been shaken as the entire galaxy was wiped clean off its radar. Inklings of it remained in the form of tiny specks of light for what was once solar systems. Killblog was dazed from the resulting celestial destruction, and attempted to regain his composure once again. However, within his blurry view, he could make out several long tendrils of something that had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. But before he could react, he was strung up, held in place by several flaming, gothic chains. They burned, holding him tightly and rendering him completely immobile. Jerry appeared within his view, appearing far more irritated than ever before.
Burn in hell!
He raised his arm firmly as fire began to erupt from the chains, completely enveloping Killblog. It was surely several million times hotter than the sun itself. It burned through Killblog's body easily, making his blood boil and his skin melt right off the bone. It wasn't enough to satisfy Jerry's newfound hatred, however, as he began to make the chains move strenuously, breaking his bones in any manner that would make it more painful, rearranging body parts in the most brutal ways imaginable, all while the fire continues to burn Killblog. Eventually, the brutalist was reduced to a puddle of blood, skin, and bones left floating in space. Jerry regained some of his composure after that ordeal, but he began to take notice of the puddle once more, as it ever so slightly shifted. It then slowly began to swirl in a sort of cyclone. It kept growing larger and the spin even faster, until a burst of white broke the cycle. Once Jerry could get a clear view, what laid in his eyes was someone he was aggravated to see once again.
Why won't you stay dead?
You'll have to try harder than that!
Jerry was not willing to let this disgrace stand, as on his right hand there formed a white ring. A bright light was emitted from within the ring, shining a pure white luminescence that dissolved the surrounding darkness of space. Once Killblog's vision returned once more, he was beholden to something extraordinary. An absurdly sized, shimmering white construct of what appeared to be Jerry himself, though he seemed much more comparable to a futuristic knight in shining armor. With a cape swirling behind him and Jerry piloting from within, he was ready for whatever might come. Killblog steadies himself and materializes a mask atop his face. A blue torrent of flame begins to engulf the upper half of his head. Swiftly, he tore the mask off his countenance, dispelling the flames. It appeared to have little effect, though quickly the area around them began to rumble. The source was revealed to stem from right behind Killblog. What emerged was nearly indescribable. A massive, imposing entity that had carried a resemblance to that of a devil, laced in a black garb. Through its eyes shone an unbreakable will, and that will was Killblog's to control. Jerry readied himself and summoned an enormous greatsword, patiently waiting for the opportune moment to strike.
It's time for you to perish!
At Killblog's command, the summon let loose a god-shattering round from its gun, creating shockwaves that rang out from the muzzle and shook space itself. The bullet was whizzing its way towards Jerry rapidly. Jerry waited calmly. And in a swift, one-handed motion, his blade effortlessly shattered the bullet into pieces. The shockwave creating an impact that pushed Killblog away, leaving him off guard. Jerry wasted no time, rushing forward, cleaving the summon clean in two as it burst into a cerulean light. Now alone, Killblog faced down the massive construct of Jerry.
Your brutality has met its end.
With all of his might, Jerry poured everything he could into that strike to finally put down the brutalist once and for all. The slice echoed across the cosmos. Reality struggled to maintain itself from such a blow. Jerry breathed a sigh of relief. He surveyed the surrounding area to find nothing. No speck of that bleached creature remained. Only the cold, lonely vastness of endless space. For a moment, he believed to be rid of his opponent for good, but only for a moment. Suddenly, he felt an absurd amount of flesh begin to grow and grow behind him. It was as if a whole new universe of flesh began to form itself after a big bang. It only continued to increase in size until its new form would eclipse that of most planets.
World on fire with the smoking sun stops everything and everyone.
Killblog had become even more vile, with breaths that could push moons and massive blood droplets which could flood entire cities, pouring from his mouth.
Your curiosity will kill you first.
Killblog's abdomen tore open, giving way to a seemingly endless abyss within his stomach. The view from outside could only be described as something darker than space itself. The void that both were in was impossible to compare to the utter despair that awaited any caught inside. Before Jerry could act, Killblog drifted forward, welcoming him to the black abyss within. Once there, Jerry's ring began to crumble off his finger until no trace of it remained. Slowly, the one source of light within the abyss was fading away to the pits of darkness, leaving only Jerry in this predicament. Jerry tried to decipher the situation, but only found himself grasping his head as his visor began to crack. More and more light began to seep out of his visor, piercing the darkened pits of nothingness. The fractures only grew more severe until there was not much left to shield the light from within. So,
Comes crashing
in one final move, Jerry released his hands and began to let all the light from within illuminate the Stygian prism. It burst forth into a brilliant display of pure white, illuminating even the seemingly infinite darkness within this abyss. Killblog only had a moment to realize what was happening before everything was drenched in Jerry's light.
universe as it was known was no more. But even beyond just that, the very structure of the infinite cosmos had been rewritten, or perhaps more accurately, scarred. The concepts of curiosity and brutality, both damaged. The level of said damage, difficult to quantify. My goal may not have been achieved in the end, but now I have all the more time to plan my next move. I couldn't have done it without you all. You should be proud. Who knows how long it'll take for them to return? Might it be sooner than we expect? Perhaps all there is to do now is wait.